Before I introduce everyone to our second session of today's webinar, or today Validation First World Congress, I would like to remind us of a few housekeeping reminders. Today, as part of this World Congress, we can earn up to 3 NAB, NCAP, NTCRC, and/or NCCDP CU credits. To earn the credits, you need to attend a full session, right? As few as 1 session or as many as 3. Please fill in the information in the survey that will be sent to you by email by the end of the day today or in the chat of Zoom, no later than Friday, February 18th, so that we can process your certificate of attendance. And we will issue, again, up to 3 of these CUs for you. Please note that due to the high number of attendees, certificate will be sent out via email throughout next week, right? But no later than February 28th. So if you have any questions about these certificates, please hold after the 28th, just to make sure that we process them, and I'm sure that we'll get to all of you. As a reminder, this session is being recorded. Also, obviously, we're using Zoom, and I would assume that all of us are very familiar with Zoom, but if you're not, just to make sure, we have different ways of interacting with the audience, the rest of the audience, and our esteemed speakers today, which is the chat and the Q&A. Please feel free to use the chat and engage with the audience. Select panelists and attendees. If you have a question specific to our speakers today, please make sure that you use the Q&A. With that, I'm super excited to introduce us to our second session today with an amazing moderator, Kevin. Every speaker, please feel free to turn on your video. Kevin, excited to introduce you. Please take it away from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. And wow, I'm always so motivated to hear Vicki and Naomi and Hedvig. And that was the first time I had the chance to really listen to what Hedvig does. Just amazing. And we can all strive to that. But my name is Kevin Carlin. I'm with Meridian Senior Living. I'm one of the co-founders and chief sales officer. And I also have the honor to sit on the board with Charles and Vicki and Hedvig and the whole team. We have a great 4 panelists today, and we're going to talk about innovation through inspiring stories. We're going to have each one of them kind of talk a little bit, introduce themselves, and what their relationship to validation is, kind of their story. We'll spend a few minutes on that, and then we'll come back to ask a few questions of the panelists. We will leave some time at the end so that you can ask your questions, because we have a wide variety of great knowledge and many, many years of working with validation. So let's go ahead and start out with Chris. We'll have you introduce yourself and a little bit about your story.
Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. My name's Chris Byrne. I've known Vicki since probably the first or second day of college, and we went to school together, have been close friends, and I followed her through her entire career in validation. And I am definitely an amateur, but when it came time to care for my father, who was in his 90s, conversations with Vicki and reading and learning about some of the validation techniques significantly helped me improve communication with my father, reduce his stress. He did not have Alzheimer's or severe dementia, but these techniques really helped me to reduce his stress, have a better relationship with him, and keep the conversation going in productive ways throughout his final year and months.
Thank you, Chris. And Scott. Oh, I think you're on mute, Scott.
How's that?
Got it.
Yeah, greetings. Great to be here with everybody. My beginning with validation began in 1991, so 31 years ago, when an activity director that I was working with at the time, I sent her down to a conference in Kansas City, and she came back and walked into my office and slammed a book down on my desk, and she said, "You need to read this book." And I was a little taken aback by that. And she went on to say, there was this lady at that conference you sent me to, and she was crazy, but everything she said made sense. And she goes, I think I know what we need to do now with Edna and Nellie Mae and Josephine. And she named several of our confused residents. And several days later, I have to admit, I was a little skeptical, but several days later, I was looking through the book that she had slammed down on my desk. And I was just flipping through the pages, and there was a phrase that like jumped off one of the pages at me. And it was the phrase, you must be firmly grounded in your reality so that you can freely travel in theirs. And that was like a light bulb going off in my head. And ever since then, I have been practicing validation. We started, several of us started leading groups, and I've led several thousand groups. I continue to lead a group every week, and it has just made an enormous difference in our retirement communities. My wife and I own a couple retirement communities and a memory care home, and we ongoingly train our staff. And Naomi, I've said for years, if I had not run across Naomi and validation, I don't think I would be working in the field today.
That's definitely the truth for me as well, Scott. Odile.
Oh, good morning. It's a morning for me in California, and so great to see people from all over the world here and the validation communities. So my journey with validation started 15 years ago. I received a gift, which was to go to a workshop, a day workshop of Naomi Feil in San Francisco. And this was the best gift I ever received. I got it because I was volunteering in a nursing home, and they thought it would be good for me. And it has been, I must say, by midday, I was saying to the friend who was with me, I want to teach that stuff. This is so great. I think, overheating, and it was, I don't know, it touched me very, very deeply. And then for years and years after that, I couldn't stop talking about validation, and I started teaching the month after, don't tell anybody, but we were so excited. It was like, yeah, you should do this, you should do that. And then I tried to get the official teaching, and this led me on a huge, lots of travel. I traveled to France and was welcomed by the French validation community, Katia and Frédéric. Thank you, Katia. You really give me a wonderful push, lots of love. And at the same time, I decided to become a recreation therapist because I was a musician. And I was spending a lot of time in retirement communities playing the accordion, that's what I do. But I wanted to have more influence. So it has been this itinerary together, and I became a teacher. And I'm always a bit on the margin because I'm on California, but validation is still with me. And now I do home care. And it's, I use it every day. I use it with my home care team, and I do a lot of also support group for families. So this is my, thank you. Thank you for, bringing validation into my life. All the validation community was present here.
Thank you, Odile. Yeah, you can just hear your passion. I love it. It's great to meet you. And last but not least, Heather.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much. Hi, fellow panelists. It's great to see you guys. And I do want to give a shout out to all those of you on Zoom that are just joining from all over. I'm in Denver right now, and it's humbling to be with a speaker that's in our next session that's from Australia, and from so many of you, many of you who are in other countries. I also want to give a shout out to those of you who are care partnering with your own parents or your own loved one. I am alongside of you. It is hard, and it is not necessarily the easiest path, but it's one of the most rewarding. For the last 20 years, I've dedicated my life to working with seniors, and for the last 13 years specifically, working with older adults with memory care. My undergrad is in recreation therapy, just like Odile. And as recreation therapists, we're constantly looking for different tools to put into our tool belt so that way we can better serve the folks that we're serving. My undergrad, again, is in recreation therapy. And right now I'm getting my master's at Texas State University in their fairly new program of dementia and aging studies. It's been a wonderful ride so far, learning a lot. And thankfully, my relationship with validation is just growing. It continues to open doors with the residents that I have the honor to speak with and to interact with when I'm in the communities. And certainly communication is key to everybody's life. It doesn't stop as we age. We want to be able to express. We want to be able to feel heard and to feel understood. It's part of our basic unmet needs. So when I joined Sunrise 13 years ago, and I learned that they were an organization that could potentially certify me, I said, sign me up, please. I need to know these techniques. It's going to help just everybody, right? Help our residents, help me as a teacher, right? So yeah, so I'm grateful that I became a certified validation worker through Rita Altman and Sandy Strothmeyer. So shout out to you guys. Thank you guys so much. This couldn't be as good as it is without you guys having been part of this journey. And right now I'm a certified validation teacher, and I'm currently teaching my first class of 23 students with Rita Altman. So I'm really grateful to still be spreading and sharing validation. So thank you so much. And this is going to be a great panel.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. And again, I want to echo, it is truly amazing that we have almost 800 people from all over the world listening in to, people that know validation, but also people that can learn from it, because it will change your life. With that being said, I'd like to direct my first questions to Chris. And first question is, what was the most important thing that you learned from validation as a caregiver?
I think the most important thing was to encounter my dad where he was, and to realize and to be very focused. Well, it's actually two things: to be very focused on how I communicated with him. So whereas people would shout to him from the kitchen, for example, I always made sure that I came around and was facing him. He had macular degeneration and he was hard of hearing. So for him to be able to hear me, I didn't have to shout. My brothers would shout at him because he had hearing aids, and I didn't have to shout. I could speak in a normal tone of voice. And the second most important thing was when he was ultimately in an assisted living facility, to talk to the caregivers, because they would come in the morning and go, "And how are we today?" And my father was highly educated and had a wicked sense of humor, and that infantilization drove him bats. So I actually was able to talk to them and say, "Hey, why don't you talk to him like the adult he is?" And he was a very kind-hearted person. He would never complain to them, but it did change his relationship with his other caregivers, because they really began to understand him as a grown-up human being, not somebody they were just coming in and doing. And it made him a lot happier there.
And how did it affect your relationship with your father and your siblings?
Well, with my father, it was really just very much, we were able to communicate, and what would be more anxiety producing for him, whether it was about finances or care or whatever, he was able to calm down. And with my siblings, I said, "How do you do that?" They just didn't understand. But I also told them, come around, talk to him from the front. You don't have to shout. So, I'm still very close to my siblings. So we had we were able to have a good conversation about it, and for them to try some of these things as well.
Yeah, and I know you talk about, facing your father and making sure that he can see you in very directed communication. But what were any specific validation techniques that were easiest for you to use?
Well, I think the most easy to use was, if he was just sitting in his chair or doing something and thinking about something else, was to really find out where he was, right? What are you thinking about? What's going on? And he didn't go into another time, for example, but he'd say, "Oh, I was thinking about being a kid in the north of Hartford," or whatever. And so I could, encounter him where he was, as somebody said earlier, and that just opened the door to more communication. And for me to take my ego out of it and really focus on him was delightful, really great.
Yeah, it's so hard and so important to take that ego out of it. Did you find, were there any techniques that were harder to use? I know you used limited ones, but were there any that you found maybe didn't work and you had to go back to the drawing board?
I don't have a recollection of that. I think that what would happen is it would be more likely that I would forget, right? So I'd be going out of the room and I'd say something out as I was going out of the room and not finish the conversation with him. And he'd go, what? So it was kind of on me to make sure that I was the one doing the communication.
Okay. And did you find, did it bring your family together? What were the effects of, really this open type of communication and using validation?
I think it really helped for everybody to be conscious of and accept where my father was in his life process, and to be able to, especially as he declined, to be able just to be present to him. And that was probably the most important thing. And for all of us, if we had personal upset or anxiety about it, we took it out of the room and shared it with one another. So I think just really the ability to be present to him throughout his last months was really important.
Yeah, and if you were to give any advice to whether it be caregivers or care workers out there in the world, what would it be?
Well, one, read the book. Read the book and educate yourself. But realize that the idea is that you're trying to make a connection, and that's what it's about. And that the connection, you as the person who is, in my case, of somewhat sounder mind at the time, being able to get off myself and to realize that the focus needs to be on the person and what they're giving you, and respond to what they're giving you rather than what you want from them.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And these next questions are for Scott Averill. So you do a lot of work with groups, which I think is incredible. That's one thing that we want to, do in our organization. But can you tell us, how did validation groups affect your company?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that again? I had a coworker who just stopped in.
No problem. I was just saying you do a lot of work with groups in your company, and was just asking, how did validation groups affect your company, and how did you really implement them into your daily or weekly life to benefit your residents?
Oh, great question. We, as I said, I've been leading groups since the early 90s. And what we found over the years is that the groups are just such a catalyst to people discovering what validation is all about. We routinely invite staff members to come in and be part of the group. And it's always amazing, to have staff members join us who have been working with our residents for, sometimes several years, and they'll come into our group and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize she could talk that much," and they're just like startled. Because groups just bring that out. I always call it the magic. It's just the magic of a validation group. So that's we routinely will do that and invite our coworkers into groups, and then we just ongoingly train our staff. I mean, at in services all the time, and it's just and I really emphasize it's an ongoing practice. I've been practicing it now for 30 years. I continue to learn. As Naomi has said through the years, she learned by making mistakes. I still make mistakes, but I keep practicing, and it just makes such a profound difference in the culture of our communities.
Yeah, can you think of, for the audience here, of maybe a great example of, somebody that, it really was, you touched them and that magic moment came out? I'm sure you have many, many over the years.
Oh my gosh.
Any specific that you would share?
Oh, I remember several years ago, she was our farewell person for many years, and her name was Martha. And she would just give these eloquent farewells at the end of our meetings. She would stand and she would just engage everyone. And I can't remember exactly what we were talking about in this one group, but she shared with us that somebody had committed suicide in her life. And it came out in kind of a disjointed way. But we could tell that it was like a huge burden that she was releasing. She was letting it go. And afterwards, I contacted her family, and I found out that it was her father who had committed suicide early in her life. And this was, she'd been in our group for several years and never communicated that until this one particular day, where I guess she felt safe to express that. And it was truly, it was very, very emotional and very moving for all of us to hear that.
Yeah, wow, what a breakthrough. And Naomi would say it's getting through to those unmet needs, those things that happened in the past and doesn't always happen, but you made it happen. What a great story. Megan, do we have a video that for Scott?
Yes, Charles, do you have that queued up?
We have a little video of groups that I think just really shows how powerful they are.
And if Charles, I don't know if I asked Charles to do this, but if he could run that all the way through to the end, it would be great. Is he able to do that? It's just like it's less than a couple minutes, I think.
Yes, the answer is yes, and I'm getting that queued up right now. Just give me 1 second, sure.
Perfect.
This is a group that we've had going for several years, and I pay special attention to the lady in the purple who was not very verbal at that point.
And Scott, as a reminder, you just want me to play the whole video, correct?
No, go to a minute. You could go to a minute in, and then about right. Yeah, right there.
Yep. Thank you.
The songs.
I have to say, I looked over across the way at our friend Colleen while we were singing that in that pretty yellow sweater, and you're just beaming, Colleen. You're just beaming. Your eyes are smiling, your mouth is smiling, your whole face is smiling.
That's the Irish in me.
You have to get into their world and into the world of a confused resident. So our validation circles are a way of having our confused residents belong, to still feel a part of things.
And to be free to travel in their reality.
In my experience, the most validating thing that I feel you can do with someone who has dementia, who has time and place confused, just really to be present.
You go in being willing to dance with whatever shows up. It restores why I chose to get into long-term care.
A lot of times when people are confused, they're like outcasts. But in the validation groups, there's no one that's an outcast.
I think if everybody learned validation, we'd have a whole lot better world.
Wow, Scott, my next question was going to be, what changes do you see in group members? And I'll still ask it, but you can see it just in their faces. And I do believe what your creative engagement specialist said, validation can change the world, truly can, and you're showing that. So what are the main changes that you see from somebody when they come in and maybe they're not engaging because they haven't been validated and they're coming in as a new resident? What's kind of the progression that you see? That's my first question. Of one other follow-up.
They just begin to participate at a higher level, and it really helps. It helps. We have everybody mainstreamed. We don't have our confused residents in a particular neighborhood, and it really helps our alert and oriented residents accept our confused residents, because they see us, and we invite oftentimes some of our alert and oriented residents to be a part of our groups, and it really helps them and helps all of our alert and oriented residents accept our confused folks and continue to have them just be a part of our everyday life.
Yeah, truly, it works, right? That's great to see it in video. And what changes do you see in team members when they learn validation? Maybe coming from another.
It definitely impacts their longevity. They connect. We still have turnover, but we see a significant decrease in staff turnover because they're just more connected.
Yeah, so important, especially in this day and age. Thank you, Scott. And we'll move to Odile LaVault. I hope I pronounced your last name right. But my first question for you is, and it's for groups too, because I know you work a lot with groups, is what has validation training and working with groups given you as a recreational therapist in your journey? Big question.
I think I'll start with validation training. I think I benefited a lot from the documentation. It's a little weird because it's a part that nobody likes in our professions. But I must say, it has been extremely helpful for me to take notes on the clients. And this is how you study validation. You have case studies and you report on them. So I had this education, and of course, all that for me happened in a second language. So it was good also for me to write those words that could be doubly unfamiliar. They were strange because sometimes the phrase that we hear or the story that we hear are unclear. And so for me to write them down after the session and to share them. So this double process, you take notes on what happened, you take notes on the details. And I really like when Scott, he started his group video, what we saw was you smile. He noticed this was not a big sound. The woman didn't jump up, but he noticed she was smiling. And this was an essential remark. So for me, it's very important, like, what are the eyes doing? What's the direction of the eyes? Are they looking down? Are they looking up? Are they closed? And especially because I worked 12 years in nursing home, and some residents just don't have a huge response, and especially when you have a group. So you really have to pay attention, the feet, the legs, the hands. This will be the way of expression, and don't miss it. So I really, it was a huge education for me, like take notes of and notice, observe the things. And as far as groups, so I must say I struggled with groups because when I learned the groups, it was more in assisted living level situation. Oh, people get up and dance, people get up and pass out food. And the clients I was working with, they didn't have this capacity. So I remember I interacted a lot with Vicky. She was my teacher. And thank you, Vicky. She would say week after week, no, you can do it. Yeah, try that. Focus on what works. So what works was music. And I happen to be a musician. So I probably pushed it on the music and just found what was possible. So you start from what is possible. Don't try to compare. It's you, it's your particular client. And in validation, there is this principle, each one is unique. Everybody is unique. So it's really good to keep that in mind, and your group is going to be unique. And just, do what people can do, how they can communicate, and be sure to catch the little moments that happen. It's also why there's a huge use of video filming in validation, which is also helpful to catch these little details that we might have missed.
Yeah. Can you think of, maybe with some of your groups, an example of where you really felt that person was moved into, that magic moment, or moved up Maslow's hierarchy of needs to the best me? I'm sure you've had many as well.
I remember something that was, I don't know if it goes with your question, but it's something I remember. And it has to do with repetition, because I also wanted to talk about repetition. But there was this, I would say, one of the most oriented participants in the group. She was oriented, but she was very forgetful, because I think she was 100 plus at that time. And she would come to the group, and after 15, 20 minutes, she would say, we should really teach, they should be as a group like that. This is really a wonderful place to be. And why don't we, and she had been a journalist, so she would go in all this thing like, why don't we get organized, to recruit other people, and I can teach them, and I'm going to write an article on this. And so at every other group, she would go in that. And I mean, it was wonderful. And so we would go along with it. And I really want to talk about repetition, because it's something that I really learned with validation, is the beauty of repetition, and that repetition is not repetition. It's just, first, if it's repeated, it's important. So please just listen with the utmost respect to repetition. And I like, each time something is repeated, myself, it's a challenge to say something different, find another, just to entertain myself, but find another answer. And it's more than entertainment. It's actually really exploring this repetition. So I remember in this group, it was always, just not because of me, because of all the members. So this proposition that the group start teaching how to make groups would always go in a different direction. But I think it was beautiful for all of us, because it gave us, we are in a very special place. We're inventing something, which is true with every group. Yes, it's a unique group, and we are in the middle of inventing something.
Yeah, I love that. The invention through repetition. I mean, that's beautiful in what you see. How about after the groups? What did you notice in the residents or groups you were working with, as far as what happened after? And was there a long period of this person being happy or being in this validated state?
Well, what I noticed is, in this group, so this was mostly units that were completely memory care. And it was always a bit strange that people mostly would not recognize each other. They would not, they would not recognize each other, but some had a relationship. Actually, they would create a family relationship. So they will be my mother, they would not know the names, but they would call people by family. This would be when there was a recognition. But people who were in the group, they had a recognition. And again, it would not be a name, but it would be a recognition. So this was something very distinct, in this group where, unfortunately, people were isolated. They were, each time the relationship seems to have to be reconstructed. reconstructed, rebuilt. So there was something permanent that was installed.
Yeah, that's great. And what do you think, for advice to others, a caregiver who's practicing validation, what do you think is the most important skill for them to learn?
Well, I'm going to repeat probably what has been said, but I think it's centering. It's so what we call centering, which is actually being aware of ourself. For me, it's really how I define centering. And it's so tempting when you are working, I would say helping. I don't like the word helping, but being very busy with another human being and wanting the best for them, it's very easy to forget about yourself to an extreme point, which is unhealthy and which will make the work more difficult and make you really lose energy. So it has been really so essential in my life to work on centering. And if you start working on that, it leads you, to be constantly aware of yourself, aware of your body. I would say the body, which is also something we neglect a lot, like eating and just, basic self-care. It gives you a firm grounding point to reach out. But if your grounding point is crumbling, is not solid, just your reach is not good. This rope you want it's not anchored, this rope out. So it goes, and then it goes into whole self-care thing, which is like meditation and mindfulness, which I always recommend to anybody I get in contact. And people don't like that. Me, no, I'm too busy to meditate. I say 1 minute, you just meditate 1 minute. But this idea of going back to yourself and also checking what's happening for me now. Like we check on the people, what's going on with you? What's happening with me now? And they check on us, so they know we are this or we're that. So we better be aware of it, because they might even hide their own problem because they know we're not ready to listen now. So this is just for me the fundamental thing before anything. Know where you are, be there, stand on your feet, know where your feet, I always say, where are your feet now? Do you know you have feet? Oh, no, I don't. My feet are completely gone. I'm floating.
Yeah, great explanation and great advice. I know when I was a executive director on site with my memory care neighborhood, I always remembered I had to stand outside for a moment and just wash everything away and be completely in the moment. And it was good for me too. You can feel it, because you're right. We all need to take that time, even if it's a minute, for ourselves. So I'm going to move on to Heather. I have some questions for Heather Easterling. So my first question is, and you have personal and work experience with validation. So maybe talk a little bit about how validation has changed how you communicate with people with dementia in your personal and your work life. Big question.
It is a big question. So I'm going to use an analogy. So what if we imagine oval stones that are really smooth as the different techniques in validation, like centering and rephrasing, open-ended questions, closed questions, asking the extreme polarity, anchored touch and reminiscence and music. So imagine those small stones, and you're trying one of those techniques, and you skip it through the water, or maybe it doesn't skip through the water evenly. Maybe it just kerplunks and makes a big splash. So regardless what validation gives us and gives me as I communicate with anybody, those ripple effects that validation gives is positive. They're well absorbed. They're profound. They're far-reaching. Those ripples just end up in all the corners of a pond. So for example, in my professional life, so if a resident comes to me, or if they're at the elevator, for example, I want to go home. Get me out of here. This is not where I live. This is not my house. I need to go and see my children, for example. I would say that's probably one of the more common things that we see, especially in a new resident that might be coming to live with us in our reminiscence neighborhood, which is what a memory care neighborhood. So instead of what validation has taught me is to not try to fix it, and to not try to redirect, and to not lie to that person. So instead, for that person, I'm going to approach them and say, I'm going to first center. And because it could be a freak out moment. It could be a moment where we're like, this resident might really escape and I might not be able to catch them. And, you know, we go through all those feelings of terror, right? Like, what if? So if I center and I'm present with that moment, present in the moment with that resident, and I start to use validation techniques, I might say something like, hopefully I know that personhood of that resident first. And so maybe I know from that resident every day at 3 o'clock, she would go and meet her children, or she would be expecting her children getting off of the bus and coming home. And if that's something that's ingrained in her cellular level, and that's something that she's proud of, she's looking for meaning and looking for purpose at that moment, then I can use that and I could be a little more proactive moving forward. We can maybe take a walk, before that 3 o'clock hour, and we could talk about her children, and we could be, present in that moment and for her without having to do redirection and lying and such. Then on a personal level, so I'm caregiving for my father. He has vascular dementia. Validation is not necessarily intended for folks with vascular dementia, but there are definitely techniques that we can use universally for anybody. So, so centering, of course, using observation. Naomi calls it exquisite listening. So really listening to that person. So for my dad, if I go in, it's going to help him cope, right? Find his coping mechanisms. It's going to help me validate his frustration and his grief for not having the retirement that he had always dreamed of. So I'll say, Dad, are you missing somebody? And because he's very aphasic, I might have to do some closed questions. And he'll say, yeah, I'm missing Sue. And I'll say, you're missing Mom. You love her so much. And I'll say, Dad, what do you miss the most about her? And it helps to open up, asking the extreme question helps to open up that conversation for my dad to then explore his feelings and to get it out, right? So I'll say, Dad, what do you want to say to Mom now? What is something you would say to her? And he might say, I love her, or I miss you, honey, or something like that. And as a daughter, I have to really practice centering because I could get very emotional in that moment. So in order to really practice that presence, deep breath, and I'll say, Dad, would it help you to pray? Because I know that his faith background is very important to him. And he will very likely say, your mom and I would pray together. Yeah, let's pray for a moment. And tapping into that coping mechanism helps him to get through that moment, that very difficult time. So validations helped him feel understood, and for me to know that I don't have to fix him. All I have to do is to love him and to listen and to validate his feelings, and it just makes the relationship easier.
Yeah, and I love your analogy of the stones, and that one thing, if we could teach people just to, be in the moment and not get upset. It's not the person that's angry at you they're angry with. They can't express those, that unmet need, those feelings. So how about working in a community? How has validation affected your colleagues and your care staff and even the family interactions in your communities?
Yeah, so we've been talking about the basic validation techniques this entire Congress so far. So validation is introduced at the very get-go at Sunrise, and upon hire, every frontline team member, whether you're the cook, the housekeeper, the caregiver, the care manager, a coordinator, regional team members, our community support office that overheads, everybody learns the basics because we all touch somebody and we all interact with our residents, right? So So once onboarded, coordinators then have a robust library of continuing education. And this includes a library of books that are helpful. So I'm going to give some shout outs to some fabulous books you guys can order. So let me see if I can get that. So Validation for Caregivers. I don't know if you can see, it's well torn in my household. I've got it dog-eared and everything. And then the Validation Breakthrough is also key. Again, it's in all of our sunrises, and they're meant to be resources for tours that come in, but also for our team members that they can do a reading book. But we offer classes. Again, right now we're teaching 23 students, and we're hoping by the end of this year, we're going to have, 80 or more trained and certified. So we're trying to further the validation, method. We have 9 teachers, 47 trained as group level workers, and we have 130 that are certified in level 1. So I encourage you all to explore getting certified in validation. So Zoom participants, definitely go to VTI website. It'll teach you.
And maybe this is a question for everyone before we go to some questions from the audience. But I know there's centering, but if you could give advice to caregivers out there on kind of what to start with, or what techniques to start with, or just how to get into. I know we have the website, but when I meet with folks, sometimes they try and there's some frustration. So I tell them, well, just try, reminiscence, or try mirroring. That's one of my favorite, because I have people come back and say, oh my gosh, after I did this, the person opened up. So from the group, kind of what are any other your recommendations, just real quick, and we'll start with Heather.
Yeah, so again, just being really present, take a deep breath, really observe. What I think is really helpful to tap into empathy, because Naomi really talks about the use of empathy and validation, is to observe, what are their facial features look like? Are their eyes really concerned? And then to really match in that moment, because that's going to build your empathy for that person. It's going to help you to be present where they are in that moment.
Great, thank you, Heather. And Odile.
Me, I really want to do something around hope, like they will find the way. So just be very hopeful. For me, a validation attitude will open. So just trust your power, and your power of being, I would say, a witness, being present. You don't have to do that much. It actually might be what you do that destroys the magic. So be super open and don't do too much, but be really with, and they will find the way. This is my experience. I'm always surprised, like, oh, I did not even have to do this super complicated intervention. Just be there and validate. Just validate. My whole presence is, you're fine. I'm there with you, and you're completely valuable. So having your whole body sending that message, including, I would say, the way you dress, the way you greet them, the way it's like, you are super valuable. You can. Yes, you can.
Thank you, Odile. And Scott, same question.
We people have already referred to centering, which is obviously very key, and another technique that we find incredibly useful. And when I go out and meet with CNA classes and other groups, Naomi calls it, I believe, direct prolonged eye contact, and we'll sometimes just say it's a be with exercise. And we do that with our staff ongoingly, and you have people be with one another, actually get inside that comfort bubble that we all have, and we encourage them to push a few inches inside of that, and then for 30 seconds or for a minute, we will have them just be with their partner. And it's amazing how difficult that is for some people, but it's a great, great training exercise. So the direct prolonged eye contact, along with the technique of factual questions, those are the centering, direct prolonged eye contact, and factual questions. Those are three just go-to techniques that we use all the time.
Yeah, great advice. We could all be with a little bit more instead of spending our 16 or 8 seconds on Google. That's our intention.
Yeah,
Thank you.
True.
And finally, Chris, same question. I think you're on mute.
I'm muted. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, for family stuff, because my dynamic was different than what other people are talking about. But patience is number one, and then realizing that the person I was talking to was not the person who was my father when I was a teenager. And it's really up to me to take care of any issues that are, now I'm a grown up, it's really up to me to take care of any issues. And really what I wanted to do was to be able to be present to him. And, my brother at one point, my older brother said, I'm going to confront mom and dad about this. And I said, no, you're not, deal with that. And he said, yeah, that's what my other brother said too. So it's really about doing whatever you need to do so you can be present to that person.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. And we do have a couple of questions from the audience. I have Laura Christian says, I love Naomi sharing how she incorporated role playing into her seminars based on feedback. Can any of the panelists share how they incorporated role playing into teaching the methods and how that impacts learners? Anyone want to take that?
I'll address that, Kevin.
Okay.
In our staff in services, we'll set that up. We'll have a staff member who might be particularly adept at acting, but we'll have them actually role play a confused resident, and then have staff members actually interact with them. And we really encourage them to stay in character, make it as real as they possibly can. And that demonstration, just like Naomi has shown, throughout the years, that role playing is so powerful, just an incredibly great exercise. So that's what we do.
Thank you, Scott. And anyone else want to address that? Odile?
Yeah, there's a simple way that actually happened during the validation classes, which is how to teach people verbal expression and the open question. So it's a moment where usually as a teacher, you say, for example, I'm getting married tomorrow, and you want a student to answer you with an open question. So this is a simple way, it's not deep acting, but it's a simple way to get into an interaction, which is a role play back and forth around a little question and how to practice verbal interactions.
Yeah, thank you, Odile. We have another question, but I would just add, we use role play a lot for everything we do, and I always use the analogy of sports. You get used to and you learn what you practice, but real life, you just have to be in the moment. And if you bobble the ball a little bit, it's okay. You're not going to lose the Super Bowl because of it. It's a moment in time with the person. So don't be afraid to practice. So we have, let's see, somebody asked, can someone explain how and when they use touch and the types of validating touch? And what is the best resource for this? Who would like to take that question first?
Or I'll take it first. So before we use any anchor touch, and that's what we call it in validation, there's strategic places where it has great symbolism. So for example, if you're speaking with someone and you're developing a rapport, and maybe they're talking about friendship or missing a friend, or really needing somebody to stand right by you. A comrade touch would be someone just placing your hand on their shoulder in a very respectful way. And you have to remember with touch, you never want to just jump into it. It's something that transpires from the conversation that the resident is talking with, or the person is talking with you about. And so you do have to employ and deploy exquisite listening and observation, and use it really strategically. So comrade touch, the mother's touch is, if you've seen the Gladys Wilson video, Naomi File does it so beautifully. I don't know if we can put a link in the chat to the Gladys Wilson video. I think that would be beneficial. But she really uses that to invigorate feelings of being with your mom, and safety and security and all the feelings that go along with that mothering kind of sense. So comrade touch, mothering touch, there's the father's touch. There's lots of them. So I believe that there are some examples of this in the YouTube channel. So I'll defer to maybe Megan or somebody from VTI to maybe put some of those links into the chat so you guys can have some more resources on those. But get involved in a certification course, take a training, take a day-long training, a half-day training. You're going to learn a lot. These are the kinds of things that we share in those.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Anyone else?
I just wanted to mention, so this is a typical anchor touch, but what I learned with validation is every touch has to be meaningful. Like, it's not unusual to see like a caregiver and a client having a conversation, and there would be a prolonged kind of touch, but it's clear that the hand has been completely forgotten. Again, it's a presence to your own body. Where is your hand? What is it doing? So it's a way of expression. So any gesture has to be meaningful, and you know why you are there, and you feel the heat under your hand, you feel your hand, and you feel the presence it generates. So it's just in general, yeah, like everything we express, our movement and our touch has to be meaningful.
That's a great point. Thank you, Odile. We can't just do it to do it, have to have some heart behind it. Anyone else before we move next question? That's a great question as well, especially during COVID and not being able to be with people. How can a family member validate a resident over the phone without being present with them? Can you give some examples on what to do? Who would like to answer that? Looks like Odile. Okay.
Yeah, of course, we have had a lot of this question, and often over the phone is, what can I talk about? You know what? So talking in a validation way it could be in the direction of reminiscence, like it's so this would be this open question. For example, it's like there is opening statement of the parent on the phone, I'm so bored, there's nothing to do here. So this is often because it's probably the reality. So what would you like to do? What did you like to do? What got you excited? What is the best sport? Where would you like to go if you could? So going in all this, let's say, kind of imaginary, pleasant direction that some are reminiscence, they're probably reminiscence based. So this is, for me, a direction to go, but there are many others.
Yeah, thank you, Odile. Anyone else want to address that question?
I guess just for me, it was always, is there something you'd like me to do? After I listened, is there something I can do for you? Is there something, because he lived in Delaware, I'm in New York City. So it was, I couldn't just run down there, but is there something you'd like me to do? Can I call somebody for you? If he was upset or agitated, and it just, sometimes just that action allowed him to calm down and say, no, I'm okay.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? I think we're just about out of time, so I do want to just take a couple minutes and thank Chris and Scott and Odile and Heather for taking the time to be part of this great panel. It's wonderful to have met you. I know we'll get to talk more hopefully in the future, because you can just see the passion and the interest for validation. It's out there, from not just sea to shining sea, but seas to shining seas and beyond the ponds, right? That's important. And if we all continue to, talk about it, learn it. I've seen it personally. I wish I knew about validation when my grandmother was going through an undiagnosed dementia, but I didn't. And, my vision is to continue to hopefully work with folks like you and again, keep spreading it. But thank you all so much for a great panel. I learned a lot as well today. So thank you all.
Thank you.
And I think
Thank
we're
you. It's been fabulous.
right on time. Yeah.